Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest secrets. I never imagined that a quiet Tuesday morning would become the dividing line between the life I thought I understood and the truth that had been waiting for me for more than 20 years. Dawn filtered through the towering windows of the Moretti estate, painting long streaks of pale gold across polished marble floors that reflected every careful step I took. At 27, I had learned to move quietly, to become almost invisible while dusting shelves lined with priceless antiques and arranging fresh white lilies that somehow always seemed to bloom before anyone noticed they were replaced. Wealth had its own rhythm, and inside Adrian Moretti's mansion, everything moved with silent precision. My 3-year-old son, Noah, sat cross-legged near the breakfast room window with a small wooden toy train he'd insisted on bringing from home. His blonde curls caught the morning sunlight as he whispered stories only he seemed to understand, happily driving the little train along the edges of the Persian rug while I finished polishing the grand piano. I had worried all morning about bringing him to work, but his preschool had closed unexpectedly because of a burst water pipe, and missing another shift wasn't an option when rent was due in 4 days. The house manager had reluctantly agreed, reminding me twice that Mr. Moretti valued order above everything else. Adrian Moretti rarely appeared before 8. The staff respected that routine almost like an unwritten law. They spoke softly when his office lights were on and never lingered in the hallways outside his private study. I'd worked there for nearly 11 months without exchanging more than a handful of polite words with him. To the newspapers, he was a billionaire investor with charitable foundations across New York. To everyone inside the estate, he was simply the man whose calm presence somehow made an entire household breathe more carefully. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed exactly 8 times. Almost immediately, footsteps echoed from the marble staircase. Steady, unhurried, confident. Every employee instinctively straightened a little. I lowered my eyes as Adrian entered the breakfast room wearing a charcoal suit without a single wrinkle, his dark hair perfectly combed despite the early hour. He greeted no one with unnecessary conversation, only a brief nod that acknowledged each person's presence. Then his attention drifted toward the window where Noah had stopped playing. My son slowly stood, clutching his tiny wooden train against his chest. Children usually stared because Adrian looked important. Noah stared for an entirely different reason. His blue eyes locked onto the vintage silver watch resting beneath Adrian's shirt cuff. He tilted his head with the strange seriousness only toddlers sometimes possess, then took 2 careful steps closer before speaking so softly I almost thought I imagined it. Check that clock, sir. The room became impossibly still. Adrian's hand froze halfway toward his coffee cup. For the first time since I'd known his name, every trace of color quietly disappeared from his face as his eyes dropped to the old watch on his wrist, and in that endless heartbeat, I realized my little boy had somehow said the one sentence no one in that mansion had ever expected to hear. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the ticking of the grandfather clock. Nobody spoke. Even the house staff, who always seemed immune to surprises, stood perfectly still as if the entire mansion had forgotten how to breathe. Adrian Moretti slowly lowered his hand from the coffee cup without taking his eyes off the silver watch resting against his wrist. It was not an expensive gesture or a dramatic reaction. It was something far more unsettling. It looked like recognition wrapped inside disbelief. Noah blinked innocently, still hugging his little wooden train. He did not seem frightened. If anything, he looked confused that every grown adult had suddenly become so quiet. I hurried across the room, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. "I am so sorry, sir," I said, forcing a nervous smile. "He is only 3. Sometimes he says random things." Adrian finally looked at me. His expression had already settled back into the calm composure everyone associated with him, but his eyes were different. They searched my face with quiet intensity, studying me as though I had become a question he could not immediately answer. "What is your son's name?" he asked. His voice remained steady, almost gentle. "Noah," I replied. "Noah Carter." Adrian nodded once before kneeling until he was almost eye level with my son. "Why did you ask me to check my watch, Noah?" Noah shrugged his tiny shoulders and pointed at the watch again. "It is sleeping." Adrian frowned slightly. "Sleeping?" Noah nodded with complete certainty. "It stopped being happy a long time ago." A chill crept down my spine. Children imagined strange things all the time. Yet something about the way Noah spoke made those words sound less like imagination and more like memory. Adrian slowly rolled back his shirt cuff. For the first time, I noticed the old watch clearly. Unlike the sleek designer watches wealthy men usually wore, this one carried tiny scratches along its silver frame. The leather strap had faded with age, and the glass held the faint marks of decades of careful use. It was beautiful, but it also looked deeply personal. Adrian studied the hands for several silent seconds. Then something almost invisible crossed his face. The second hand had stopped. Exactly at 11 minutes past 8. He carefully turned the crown, but nothing happened. The watch remained frozen in place. One of the senior staff members stepped forward. "Sir, shall I call your jeweler?" Adrian did not answer immediately. His eyes never left the motionless hands beneath the crystal. "No," he finally said. "That will not be necessary." He stood, adjusting his cuff until the watch disappeared beneath the sleeve once more. "Mrs. Carter." I instinctively straightened. "Yes, sir." "Finish your work for today." His tone remained polite, but unusually deliberate. "After lunch, I would like you and Noah to join me in the library." My stomach tightened. Had Noah broken some unspoken rule? Was I about to lose the best job I had ever managed to find? Before I could ask another question, Adrian turned toward the tall windows overlooking the gardens. The morning sunlight illuminated his reflection against the glass, but his attention was somewhere far beyond the estate. He stood perfectly still, almost listening to thoughts no one else could hear. As the rest of the staff quietly resumed their routines, I noticed his right hand unconsciously resting over the hidden watch beneath his sleeve, and I could not shake the feeling that whatever had stopped that watch years ago had just begun moving again. The rest of the morning passed in a blur, yet every ordinary task suddenly felt unfamiliar. I folded fresh towels, dusted bookshelves, and watered the orchids in the east hallway, but my thoughts never wandered far from the breakfast room. Every few minutes I caught another employee looking in my direction before quickly pretending to be busy. News traveled fast inside the estate, even when nobody spoke a single word aloud. Noah sat quietly beside the kitchen window coloring dinosaurs with a box of worn crayons the cooks kept for visiting children. He seemed perfectly happy, completely unaware that his simple sentence had unsettled the most composed man I had ever met. Shortly before noon, Mrs. Whitmore, the house manager, approached me carrying her leather appointment book. She rarely smiled, but today her expression held something closer to curiosity than disapproval. "Mr. Moretti has moved his afternoon meetings," she said. "He almost never changes his schedule." I looked up from arranging silverware. "Did he say why?" She hesitated for a brief moment before shaking her head. "No. He only instructed that the library remain private after lunch." She turned to leave, then paused. "Emily, how long have you lived in New York?" The question caught me off guard. "Almost 6 years. Before that, Vermont," I answered honestly, although I could not understand why it mattered. She nodded thoughtfully and disappeared down the hallway without another word. That uneasy feeling settled deeper in my chest. After lunch, I helped Noah wash his tiny hands in the staff kitchen. He hummed softly while bubbles floated around the sink, smiling as though this was the most ordinary day in the world. "Sweetheart," I asked gently, drying his fingers with a clean towel, "why did you tell Mr. Moretti to check his watch?" Noah looked at me with complete innocence. "Because the lady asked me." My heart skipped. "What lady?" He pointed toward the ceiling. "The nice one." I forced a small laugh, assuming he was describing another imaginary friend the way many children did. "What did she look like?" He frowned, searching for words too big for someone his age. She smiled with her eyes. She said the man forgot. A strange chill ran across my arms despite the warmth of the kitchen. Before I could ask another question, Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Moretti is ready for you." We followed her through corridors I had only cleaned, never truly noticed. The library occupied the oldest wing of the mansion, where towering walnut shelves stretched nearly 20 feet high, and sunlight filtered through stained glass windows that painted the floor with muted shades of blue and amber. Adrian stood beside the fireplace with his hands loosely folded behind his back. A leather folder rested on the desk beside him. He greeted Noah first. "Good afternoon." Noah smiled politely. Then Adrian looked at me. His expression remained calm, but there was a careful weight behind every word he spoke. "Emily." I spent the last 3 hours reviewing every record I could find about your employment application. My stomach tightened. Did I do something wrong? No. He slowly opened the leather folder. That is exactly why I have so many questions. He removed a faded photograph from inside and placed it gently on the desk between us. Even from several feet away, I immediately recognized the weathered white farmhouse in the picture. I had not seen that place since I was 5 years old, and until that moment, I had believed almost every memory connected to it had disappeared forever. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat as I stepped closer to the desk. The faded photograph looked impossibly familiar, not because I remembered every detail, but because it awakened something buried so deeply that it felt more like a forgotten dream than a real memory. The farmhouse stood beneath enormous maple trees, their branches stretching across the roof exactly the way I remembered seeing them. Through the window of an old station wagon. My fingers trembled before I even realized I was reaching toward the picture. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. Adrian did not answer immediately. He watched my reaction instead, measuring every movement with quiet patience. "Do you recognize it?" he finally asked. I swallowed hard. "I think I do." The words sounded uncertain even to me. "I have not seen this place since I was little." Noah wandered toward one of the tall bookshelves, completely fascinated by a globe nearly as tall as he was. He gently spun it with both hands while humming the same simple tune from earlier, leaving Adrian and me alone inside a silence that somehow felt heavier than any conversation. "Your employment records state that you were adopted at the age of 6, Adrian said softly. "That is correct." I nodded. "My adoptive parents told me there had been an accident. They said most of the records were destroyed and that I remembered very little afterward." Adrian glanced down at the photograph again. "Do you remember your birth parents?" I closed my eyes, hoping the answer would somehow become clearer. Instead, scattered images drifted through my mind like old film reels. A rocking chair near a fireplace, the smell of fresh cinnamon bread, a woman brushing my hair while sunlight poured through lace curtains. None of the faces stayed long enough for me to recognize them. Only feelings, I admitted, not names. Adrian slowly opened another section of the leather folder. Inside were copies of newspaper articles, county records, and handwritten notes that looked decades old. Every page had been carefully preserved. "I have spent nearly 22 years trying to identify one family connected to this house," he said quietly. "Until this morning, every search ended exactly where your childhood records begin." My heartbeat quickened. "Why?" Adrian hesitated. It was the first genuine hesitation I had ever seen from him. "Because someone living there once saved my life." His words settled over the room with surprising gentleness. There was no drama in his voice, only quiet certainty. I was 9 years old. He looked toward the stained glass windows, as though the memory still lived somewhere beyond them. "I became separated from my family during a terrible storm. I wandered for hours before someone found me. I listened without speaking. She took me inside that farmhouse, dried my clothes, gave me hot soup, and stayed with me until help arrived." He paused, his eyes lowering to the old photograph once more. "Before I left, she gave me a silver watch." Instinctively, my eyes shifted toward the cuff covering his wrist. She told me that as long as I respected time, time would always guide me home. My chest tightened. The sentence stirred something hidden inside me. Not a complete memory, only an echo. Somewhere deep in my mind, I could almost hear a woman's warm voice repeating those exact words to someone else. Before I could grasp the thought completely, Noah suddenly stopped spinning the globe. He looked across the room toward Adrian with an expression far too thoughtful for a 3-year-old. Then he quietly smiled and said, "She says you forgot the song, too." Adrian's face remained perfectly still, but the look in his eyes told me that whatever mystery had begun with an old watch was becoming something neither of us could explain. I stared at Noah, waiting for him to laugh or explain that he had invented another story the way children often did. But he simply returned his attention to the giant globe, gently tracing the outline of North America with one tiny finger. Adrian remained motionless beside the fireplace. His calm expression never broke, yet something behind his eyes had changed. It was no longer the look of a man investigating an unusual coincidence. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of a memory he had spent decades trying to reach. "What song?" I asked softly. Noah shrugged. "The one the pretty lady sings." My heart tightened again. Can you sing it for me? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then a simple melody escaped his lips. It was quiet, almost like a lullaby, only a few gentle notes without words. The sound drifted through the library so naturally that even the grandfather clock seemed quieter while he hummed. Before I realized what I was doing, I found myself whispering the next few notes. I stopped instantly. My own voice startled me. I had never heard that melody before, at least not that I could remember, yet somehow the tune continued inside my mind as though it had always belonged there. Adrian slowly lifted his head. You know it. I shook my head almost immediately. No, I cannot. But the denial sounded weak even to my own ears. Then how did you finish it? I had no answer. I searched my memory, forcing myself to remember something concrete. Faces, names, places. Instead, scattered fragments surfaced once again. Warm bread cooling beside an open window. A woman laughing while folding fresh laundry. Tiny silver chimes hanging from a porch roof, dancing with the summer breeze. The melody drifted behind those memories like sunlight slipping through old curtains. Tears unexpectedly filled my eyes. I do not understand. Adrian walked toward one of the library cabinets and unlocked the lowest drawer with a small brass key. From inside, he removed an aged wooden box polished smooth by time. He carried it to the desk with extraordinary care before opening the lid. Inside rested several carefully preserved keepsakes. Yellowed photographs. A child's knitted mitten. A pressed white flower sealed beneath clear glass. Finally, he reached for the silver watch and placed it beside the box. Without a word, he pressed a hidden notch along the edge of the case. A soft click echoed through the room. The back of the watch opened, revealing a tiny compartment so perfectly concealed that I never would have guessed it existed. Folded inside was a piece of paper no larger than a postage stamp. Adrian unfolded it carefully, revealing handwriting faded by more than 2 decades. Time will always find those who choose kindness. He looked at me. She wrote this the day she gave me the watch. My breathing slowed. Something inside me stirred again, stronger this time. I reached toward the note without thinking, and the instant my fingertips brushed the fragile paper, another image flashed through my mind. I saw a woman's hands folding the same tiny note before slipping it into the watch while a little girl stood beside her holding a stuffed rabbit almost as big as her arms. I gasped and pulled my hand back. I have seen this before. The words escaped before I could stop them. Adrian did not look surprised. He looked relieved. Then Noah quietly climbed into my lap, rested his head against my shoulder, and whispered one sentence that made every hair on my arm stand up. Mommy, she says you were that little girl. The room remained silent long after Noah's words faded into the air. I wrapped my arms around him without realizing I was doing it, holding him close as though the familiar weight of his little body could anchor me to something real. My thoughts had become scattered pieces that refused to fit together. I wanted to dismiss everything as coincidence, as imagination, as the harmless mystery children sometimes created, but deep inside, another part of me was beginning to wake up. Adrian carefully folded the tiny note and returned it to the hidden compartment inside the watch. He handled it with the same care someone might reserve for a family photograph or a priceless heirloom. When he closed the case, the soft click echoed through the library. There is something else, he said quietly. Something I never understood. He opened the wooden box again and reached beneath the stack of photographs. This time he removed a small velvet pouch that had clearly aged alongside the watch. He untied the faded cord and gently poured its contents onto the polished desk. A delicate silver charm shaped like a tiny star rested in the center of the wood. It was no larger than a dime, with one point slightly bent as though it had once been dropped onto a hard surface. The instant I saw it, my breath caught. My fingers instinctively moved toward the necklace I had worn beneath my uniform every day for as long as I could remember. Hidden beneath my blouse was a thin silver chain with an identical star hanging from it. My adoptive mother had always told me it had been around my neck when social workers found me. She never knew where it came from. My hands trembled as I slowly lifted the necklace into view. Adrian's eyes widened for the first time since I had met him. Without speaking, he placed the tiny charm beside mine. They were not merely similar. They fit together perfectly. The bent point on his charm slid into a matching notch on mine, forming a complete 8-pointed star. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. It felt as though time itself had stopped inside the library. "I have never seen yours before," Adrian finally whispered. The woman told me there were 2 pieces. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My mother always said she found this with me. Even saying those words felt strange because I suddenly realized I meant my adoptive mother, not the woman whose face I still could not remember. Adrian looked down at the completed star. She told me that one day the missing half would lead me back to someone who needed to find their way home. I swallowed hard. The sentence wrapped itself around the fragments already stirring inside my mind. Home, cinnamon bread, the porch chimes, the lullaby, the farmhouse. One by one, the memories no longer felt separate. They felt connected. Noah slid off my lap and wandered toward the tall windows. Outside, soft rain had begun falling over the gardens, tapping gently against the glass. He pressed his tiny hand against the window and smiled. "She likes the rain," he whispered. I walked over beside him. "Who?" He looked up at me as though the answer should have been obvious. "Your mommy." Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. Not from fear, not even from sadness. From the overwhelming feeling that someone I had spent my entire life searching for without knowing it had never completely disappeared. Behind me, Adrian picked up the restored silver star and stared at it for a long moment before quietly saying something that made the entire mystery grow even larger. "Emily, if you are who I believe you are, then this necklace is only the beginning, because there was one more thing your mother left behind, and nobody has been able to find it for 22 years. I could not take my eyes off the 2 silver pieces resting together on Adrian's desk. Separately, they looked like ordinary keepsakes that time had almost forgotten. Joined together, they felt like proof that 2 lives had been quietly moving toward each other long before either of us realized it. Outside, the rain continued falling in soft waves across the gardens, turning the stone pathways into shimmering ribbons beneath the gray afternoon sky. Noah remained by the window, tracing invisible circles through the fog forming on the glass. He seemed completely at peace, as though everything unfolding inside the library made perfect sense to him. I wished I understood even half as much. "What was the last thing?" I finally asked, my voice barely louder than the rain. Adrian carefully placed the completed silver star back onto the velvet cloth before closing the wooden box halfway. "A journal," he answered. "Your mother kept a small leather journal." He paused for a moment, choosing each word carefully. She wrote in it every evening. Stories, recipes, names of people she helped, little moments that mattered to her. "Before I left that farmhouse, she told me that memories disappear unless someone chooses to protect them." The sentence settled deep inside me. Memories. That single word seemed to unlock another door somewhere inside my mind. I closed my eyes without thinking. This time the images arrived more clearly than before. I saw rough wooden shelves lined with glass jars full of flour and sugar. I heard gentle laughter drifting from another room. Then I saw a woman sitting at a kitchen table beneath a yellow lamp, writing inside a small brown notebook while humming the same lullaby Noah had sung only minutes earlier. The memory lasted only a heartbeat before fading again, but it was enough. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks. "She had brown hair," I whispered. Adrian looked at me immediately. "What did you say?" "My mother." I opened my eyes slowly. I cannot see her face yet, but I remember her hair catching the light while she wrote. Adrian's expression softened in a way I had never imagined possible. That is exactly how I remember her. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We simply allowed the fragile memory to exist without forcing it into something larger than it was. Then Adrian walked toward one of the library shelves and removed a framed photograph I had never noticed before. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside an older couple at what looked like a charity event many years ago. He pointed to the elegant woman smiling beside him. "My mother spent years searching for the woman who helped me. She hired investigators across 3 states. His voice grew quieter. Every lead disappeared after the farmhouse was abandoned. I studied the photograph before looking back at him. "Why did you never stop searching?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Because kindness like hers changes a life forever." His words did not sound rehearsed. They sounded lived. At that moment, Noah suddenly left the window and wandered toward a small side table covered with antique books. Without touching anything else, he pointed directly at the lowest drawer. "It is under there," he said matter-of-factly. Adrian frowned. "What is under there?" Noah smiled the same innocent smile he always wore when talking about things adults could not understand. The book, she said. Everybody keeps looking in the wrong place. Adrian and I exchanged a long silent glance. Neither of us had mentioned the missing journal after our conversation began. Neither of us had pointed toward that table. Yet something in Noah's calm certainty made Adrian slowly kneel beside the antique cabinet, reach for the hidden drawer beneath it, and discover a tiny brass key taped carefully underneath the wood exactly where no one had thought to search for more than 20 years. Adrian carefully peeled the tiny brass key away from the underside of the drawer, turning it over in his palm as though he was afraid it might disappear if he blinked. The metal had darkened with age, but the intricate engraving of an 8-pointed star remained visible beneath years of dust. My necklace rested against my chest beneath my blouse, and for a strange moment I could almost feel it growing warmer. Neither of us spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt sacred, as though the library itself had been waiting for this moment. Noah wandered back to my side, slipped his small hand into mine, and looked up at Adrian with complete confidence. "The little door," he said softly. Adrian lowered his eyes to the antique cabinet. He examined every carved edge until his fingers paused against an almost invisible seam hidden within the decorative woodwork. I would have cleaned that cabinet 100 times without ever noticing it. He inserted the key and turned it slowly. A quiet click echoed through the room. A narrow compartment slid open, revealing a small leather journal wrapped inside a piece of faded linen. Time seemed to stop. Adrian lifted the journal with both hands, almost reverently, before placing it on the desk between us. The brown leather had cracked with age, and the corners were worn smooth from years of gentle use. Tucked beneath the ribbon tied around it rested a dried white flower that somehow remained intact despite the passing decades. My chest tightened before I even touched it. I knew that flower. I did not know how, but I knew it. "May I?" I whispered. Adrian nodded without hesitation. My fingertips trembled as I untied the ribbon. The faint scent of old paper drifted upward, carrying with it something impossible to describe. It smelled like cedar wood, cinnamon, and rain. The moment I opened the first page, tears blurred my vision. Written across the inside cover in elegant handwriting were the words, "For my Emily, because every beautiful life deserves to remember where love began." My knees nearly gave out beneath me. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. My name, not written by strangers, not printed on an adoption record, written by someone who had known me before I could remember myself. A sob escaped before I could stop it. Noah wrapped both arms around my leg without saying a word. Adrian remained silent, giving me the space to breathe through emotions neither of us had expected to arrive so suddenly. I carefully turned the next page. It was filled with ordinary moments. Notes about planting tomatoes in spring. A recipe for apple pie. A reminder to repair the porch swing before winter. Every sentence reflected kindness rather than hardship. Then I reached an entry dated just 3 days before everything in my memory disappeared. Emily laughed all afternoon because she believes the wind is singing through the chimes. She insists every clock has a heart, and if you listen carefully, it tells you when someone needs you. I froze. My breathing stopped. I looked toward the silver watch resting on Adrian's desk. It stopped being happy. Noah had said that morning. Not because he had imagined it. Because someone had once taught those words to a little girl who eventually forgot them. A memory rushed back with startling clarity. I was sitting beside my mother on the farmhouse porch while she gently wound the silver watch. I had asked why she smiled every time she listened to it. She kissed my forehead and answered, "Because time only matters when it is spent loving people." I covered my mouth as the memory settled into place, no longer a fragment, but something real. Adrian quietly lowered his eyes, overcome by the same truth. At that exact moment, a folded envelope slipped from between the final pages of the journal and landed softly on the desk. Across the front, in the same elegant handwriting, were 6 words that changed everything once again. To the man with the silver watch. My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, and the edges were softened by time, but the handwriting remained graceful and unmistakably personal. Adrian stood across from me without saying a word. He did not ask me to hurry. He did not reach for the letter. Somehow we both understood that whatever was written inside belonged equally to the past we had lost and the future neither of us had expected to find. I carefully broke the old seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The ink had faded slightly, but every sentence remained clear. If you are reading this, then time has kept its promise. Dear young man, you once told my daughter that you wished you could repay kindness someday. You already have. The greatest gift anyone can give another person is carrying hope forward. If life ever brings you back here, please do not search for me. Search for Emily instead. She will need people who remind her that goodness still exists. If she has forgotten us, do not ask her to remember too quickly. Let love return one memory at a time. And if you still have the watch, you already know that every minute becomes valuable only when it is shared. I lowered the letter as tears quietly rolled down my face. The room had disappeared around me. There was only my mother's voice echoing through words she had written decades earlier, somehow knowing that one day they would find their way into my hands. Adrian slowly looked toward the silver watch resting beside the journal. She believed time connected people, he said softly. I thought it was only a beautiful idea. He smiled for the first time since I had met him, not the polite smile of a businessman, but the grateful smile of someone who had finally come home. She was right. Noah gently tugged on my sleeve. I looked down to find him holding the two halves of the silver star we had joined together earlier. It belongs to you now, Mommy, he whispered. I knelt beside him and wrapped my arms around his tiny shoulders. No, I answered, brushing a curl away from his forehead. It belongs to all of us. Adrian carefully fastened the completed star onto my necklace, his movements respectful and unhurried. When he stepped back, the small silver pendant rested over my heart exactly where it had always been meant to rest. Outside, the rain had stopped. Warm afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, filling the library with golden light that reflected across the polished wood and the old journal lying open on the desk. For the first time in more than 20 years, the story inside those pages no longer belonged to the past alone. It belonged to the people standing in that room. Adrian reached into his pocket and removed the silver watch one last time. He gently wound the crown. This time, instead of remaining silent, the second hand moved. One steady tick, then another. The quiet rhythm filled the library with unexpected warmth. Noah laughed and clapped his hands. It is happy again, he said. Adrian looked at me, his eyes brighter than they had been all day. Your mother once gave a frightened little boy a reason to believe that kindness could change a life. He paused before continuing. Today, because of you and Noah, she did it. Again, I looked down at the journal, the watch, and the restored silver star, realizing that none of the extraordinary things that had happened that day began with wealth, power, or luck. They began with one woman choosing compassion, one child remembering love, and one quiet moment that proved the smallest voices are sometimes trusted with the greatest truths. As the old clock in the hallway began to chime the next hour, I no longer heard the passing of time. I heard the sound of a promise finally fulfilled.